Have you ever followed a crochet or knitting pattern exactly as written, same yarn weight, same hook size, or needle size, same stitch count, and still ended up with a sweater that fits like a potato sack? Or a scarf that somehow looks more like a dish towel than the gorgeous project photo? And no shade at all, because I've been there. I've followed a pattern to the letter, trusted the instructions, trusted the photos, trusted the sizing chart, and still ended up holding a finished piece thinking, now how did I get here? If you've ever wondered why your crochet or knitting projects don't look like the photos, if you've ever struggled with weird sizing, confusing instructions, or patterns that just don't seem to work no matter how carefully you follow them, or if you've ever blamed yourself and thought, maybe I'm just bad at this video is for you. Today we're talking about the biggest lies in crochet and knitting patterns, the things that pattern writers don't always tell you, and sometimes they don't even realize themselves. And yes, we're gonna call them out, because here's the truth, you're putting way too much time, effort, money, and heart into this craft to end up with something that you don't absolutely love. Crocheting and knitting are supposed to be helpful guides, not confusing puzzles that leave you frustrated and disappointed in the end. Now, to be clear, most patterns aren't lying on purpose. Pattern designers aren't out to sabotage your projects, but many patterns are incomplete, overly optimistic, or written by someone with a completely different body type, tension, or skill level than yours. And when no one talks about it, makers end up feeling like they failed, when really the system failed them. So today I'm breaking down the top 7 biggest lies in crochet and knitting patterns, why they happen, and most importantly, how to work around them so you actually get the results you want. Whether you're a beginner, an intermediate maker, or someone who's been crocheting or knitting for years, I promise you'll recognize at least one of these. So let's expose the pattern lies and make projects that you're actually proud to wear. Number 1 lie, and honestly the biggest offender in knitting and crochet patterns, is the idea that gauge is optional. If a pattern tells you to skip the gauge, I'm just gonna say it, they're lying to you. Gauge is not a suggestion. Gauge is not a boring extra step. Gauge is the blueprint for your entire project. It's the foundation that determines whether your finished piece actually matches the size, fit, and look of the pattern that you're following. If your gauge is off, everything is off. Your sweater is gonna be too big or too small, your sleeves are gonna be the wrong length, your neckline will stretch in weird places, and your throw blanket might end up the size of a baby blanket instead of a queen-size bedspread. Now I know what you're thinking, because you tell me in the comments all the time, I never do gauge and my project turns out fine. And listen, if you're making scarves, blankets, and decorative pieces, that might be totally okay for you. But if you're making wearables, sweaters, cardigans, tops, socks, gauge is not optional at all. What's funny to me is that a lot of people say gauge swatches are a waste of time, but let's be honest, isn't spending weeks crocheting and knitting a garment only to realize that it doesn't fit your body at all also a waste of time? I mean, you gotta pick your poison at this point. Personally, I would much rather rip off the band-aid and spend an hour making a gauge swatch at the beginning of the project than finish the whole project and have to frog it, donate it, or let it sit in my closet forever. Gauge saves you time, yarn, and frustration, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And here's the part that a lot of patterns don't explain clearly. Even the tiniest difference in gauge can completely change your project. One extra stitch per inch might not sound like much, but across a whole sweater, that adds up really fast. So if you want your project to actually resemble the pattern photo in size, fit, and drape, you need to check your gauge. And please hear this tip, because it matters. Always make your gauge swatch in the actual stitch pattern the design uses. Different stitches behave differently, and skipping this step can throw everything off. Seriously, please don't skimp on this. And one last thing, if a crochet or knitting project for a wearable doesn't include a gauge at all, that is a red flag. Even blanket patterns usually list a gauge, and most people don't even bother checking it. So if a wearable pattern leaves it out completely, not to be dramatic, but run. Gauge isn't the enemy. It's the reason your handmade pieces actually fit and look the way that you imagine. Lie number 2, you can substitute with any yarn. If you've been here for a while, you already know this one really grinds my gears. This lie shows up in so many different ways. Sometimes a pattern will casually say, if you don't have this yarn, you can use any worsted weight yarn. And I'm sorry, but no, you can't. Not if you want the same results, and definitely not if you want your project to look anything like the pattern photo. Yarn substitution isn't just about matching the label that says worsted weight. When you change the yarn, you're changing the entire fabric, how it behaves, how it stretches, how it drapes, and how it wears over time. Patterns often say substitute with a similar weight yarn, but weight alone is not enough. You have to consider fiber content, ply structure, twist, weight per skein, and even how the yarn feels in your hands while you're working with it. For example, let's talk about fiber, because this is where a lot of projects go wrong. If you substitute cotton for wool, suddenly your sweater has zero stretch, very little elasticity, and the fabric might feel stiff and heavy. Your stitches might even look dense or flat, almost like a brick wall. Meanwhile, wool has bounce and memory, which is why it's so forgiving in garments. Acrylic behaves differently than both. Alpaca drapes beautifully but stretches like crazy. Linen softens over time but starts out a little bit stiff. These differences matter, especially in crochet and knitting patterns for wearables. So when a pattern tells you you can substitute with any yarn, what they really mean but don't explain is that you need to find a yarn that creates a similar fabric, not just one that has the same weight on the label. So here's the real rule, the one that patterns should say out loud. If you substitute yarn, you must match both gauge and fabric drape. Yes, I know I already talked about gauge swatching, but using a different yarn is another major reason why gauge swatching is non-negotiable. You're not just checking stitch count, you're checking how the fabric feels, how it moves, and whether it actually works for that design. Yarn substitution isn't bad, it's not wrong, but it requires intention. When you swap yarn without understanding how fiber and structure affect your project, you're basically gambling on the outcome. And if your finished project doesn't turn out the way you hoped, it's not because you're a bad crocheter or knitter, it's because the pattern didn't tell you the truth about yarn substitution. Lie number 3, the sizing is accurate. Let me tell you something. Sizing is one of the biggest lies in the knitting and crochet pattern world, and most of the time it's completely unintentional. Let me ask you this. How many times have you been asked to order your t-shirt size for an event? A volunteer shirt, a work event, a family holiday, matching outfits, whatever it is. Most of the time, we're expected to just pick a size without trying it on. And we know how that usually goes. For me, my go-to size is a medium, but sometimes that medium fits perfectly and sometimes it's skin tight. And sometimes it's basically a dress. And that's because sizing labels don't always tell the whole story. Knitting and crochet garments work the same way. Most crochet and knitting patterns are sized using standard body measurements, often based on guidelines from the Craft Yarn Council. These measurements are meant to be a helpful baseline, but not guarantee a fit. And just like we already know with t-shirts, not every body that wears a medium is built the same. Some of us have thicker arms, some of us have a larger bust, some of us have narrower shoulders, wider hips, a longer torso. And when a pattern is graded using standard measurements, it can't possibly account for every body shape, even with the same size. That's why relying on pattern size alone is one of the fastest ways to end up with a garment that doesn't fit the way that you expected. Here's a tip that'll save you a lot of frustration. Always check the finished garment measurements and not just the pattern size. For example, if a sweater pattern says that the finished measurement bust is 40 inches and your actual bust is 36 inches, that might mean the design includes positive ease. But depending on your style, the stitch pattern, and how you want the garment to fit, you might actually need negative ease. Or you might need to choose a smaller size in that specific section. And this is where a lot of makers get stuck, because patterns don't always explain ease very clearly. And if you want your sweater to fit well, you have to understand ease, whether the garment is meant to be fitted, relaxed, oversized, or boxy, and how that ease works with your body measurements. And here's the part I don't love saying, but it needs to be said. If a crochet or knitting pattern doesn't include the finished measurements, that's a red flag. Because if the designer can't tell you what measurements they use to design each size, how did they grade the pattern? How do they know where the increases, decreases, or shaping are supposed to even land in your body? Sizing isn't about picking a label like small, medium, and large. It's about understanding measurements, ease, and how the pattern was constructed in the first place. And once you start looking at patterns this way, a lot of bad fit issues suddenly make a lot more sense. Lie number 4, blocking is optional. No, that is a lie. Now let me be clear, how you choose to block is optional. Whether you wet block, steam block, or use heat on certain fibers, that part is flexible. But blocking itself is not optional, especially when it comes to crochet and knitting garments. Without blocking, your finished piece can literally feel stiff, uneven, and uncomfortable, almost like a hard piece of cardboard. The stitches don't sit right, the fabric doesn't drape properly, and the measurements you work so hard to achieve might not even be accurate. Blocking is the step that takes your project from homemade to handmade. It's what turns messy, bumpy, uneven projects into something that looks polished and professional. When you block a crochet or knitting project, you do several important things all at once. You're shaping the fabric, relaxing the fibers, evening out your tension, opening up the stitches, and most importantly, setting the final measurements for your garment. If you skip blocking, your finished project might not match the size, fit, or appearance shown in the photo, even if you followed the pattern perfectly. That's because most pattern photos are taken after the piece has been fully blocked. And here's the good news. Blocking doesn't have to be scary, complicated, or expensive. There are so many ways to block, and the best method depends on your yarn yarn fiber, and the type of project that you're making. You can wet block by soaking your piece, gently squeeze out the water and shaping it into size and pinning it in place to dry. You can steam block using a garment steamer or a low heat iron. Just hover, don't touch it, especially with acrylic yarn. And if you're working with a common acrylic yarn and feel a little bit lazy, I'm just gonna say it. Sometimes I throw it in the washer and dryer and that can be absolute magic. I've done this with several cardigan makes and the transformation is incredible. The fabric softens, the stitches relax, and the whole garment looks better. Blocking isn't an extra step, it's part of the process. And once you start treating it that way, your crochet projects will look better, fit better, and feel better every single time. Lie number 5, you can finish this in a day. Let's be honest, this usually is a marketing lie. And before anyone comes for me in the comments, I'll say it first. I've used this one myself. And since I'm admitting it in public, I think I deserve a little credit for my honesty, right? But here's an important nuance. When designers label something as a one-day make or a weekend project, it's not always meant to be deceptive. It's often a promotional tool. Not everyone wants to commit to a year-long blanket or a sweater that takes months to finish. Some makers are looking for quick wins, vacation projects, something they can start and actually finish in a short amount of time. For example, my black or white bucket hat is marketed as a one-day project, and in that case, I genuinely meant it. The pattern includes a 1-hour video tutorial that basically walks you through the entire construction step by step. I personally made it in a day, so I know it's possible. Now, does that mean everyone will finish it in a day? Of course not. Could there be a maker out there who takes 2 weeks? Absolutely. And that doesn't mean you're slow, bad at crochet, or doing something wrong. This is where expectations matter. Patterns are often written by experienced crocheters and knitters, people who work quickly, have muscle memory, and don't have to stop to look up techniques. So when a designer estimates project time, they're usually basing it on their speed, not a beginner's. This is why patterns so often underestimate how long something will actually take for the average maker. If you're a beginner or even an intermediate crocheter or knitter, a project labeled as 2 hours might realistically take you about 2 days or 2 weeks. And that's completely okay. Learning, pausing, frogging, rewatching tutorials, and fixing mistakes all takes time, and that time counts. So when you see a phrase like a one-day make or weekend project or quick crochet pattern, treat them as relative time estimates, not promises. Set realistic expectations of yourself and work at your own pace. And don't feel bad if your timeline doesn't match the pattern description. Finishing slower doesn't make you less skilled, it just makes you human. And at the end of the day, crochet and knitting are supposed to be enjoyable. The project is done when it's done, not when the marketing says it should be. Lie number 6, tested equals perfect. And this one's sneaky because most people assume that if a crochet or knitting pattern has been tested, that means every possible issue has been caught. But that's not always how pattern testing actually works. Pattern testing is incredibly valuable, but it's not a magical guarantee. Here's the part most makers don't see. When a designer says a pattern has been tested, you usually don't know how it was tested. You don't know what sizes the testers made. It's entirely possible that all of the testers were the same size, maybe a medium or a large. And sure, those might be spot on, but what about the sizes from 2X and 3X or larger counts? What about someone on the smaller range? If those sizes weren't tested, issues can slip through, especially when it comes to grading, shaping, and fit. A lot of pattern testing also happens using the same yarn, the same fiber, and sometimes even the same hook or needle size the designer used. That means the pattern may work beautifully under those exact same conditions, but not necessarily outside of them. And then there's skill level. Testers are often experienced crocheters and knitters, people who read between lines, fix small errors on the fly, and make adjustments without even realizing that they're doing it. That can mask unclear instructions that would completely confuse a beginner. So here's the truth. Testing does not automatically guarantee inclusivity, clarity, or good grading. It helps a lot, but it's not foolproof. This is why I always say tested doesn't mean tested for you. And I know I bring this topic up a lot, but I want to address something I see in the comments fairly often. There's this idea floating around that if a pattern isn't tested, it shouldn't be sold. And I respectfully disagree. Untested patterns can be just as good and sometimes just as valuable as tested ones. Some designers self-test extensively, and some patterns are simple enough that formal testing doesn't add too much. Meanwhile, with some of the absolute pattern nightmares y'all have shared with me in the comments, and trust me, I've seen a lot of things. Testing seems like the least of our worries in parts of the crochet community. Y'all are out here encountering some real monsters, and for that, I am so sorry. The takeaway here isn't that testing is bad. Testing is important, but testing alone doesn't guarantee a perfect pattern. That's why reading reviews, checking finished measurements, and understanding construction really matters, even when a pattern proudly says it's been tested. Because at the end of the day, a pattern pattern being tested doesn't mean it was tested for your body, your yarn, your tension, or your skill level. Okay, last lie, and this one really gets me. Lie number 7, you can't modify the pattern. You can absolutely modify a crochet or knitting pattern. You can change the length, add or remove sleeves, adjust the neckline, modify the ease, change a stitch pattern, or alter the shaping to actually fit your body and your style. Does it take practice? Yes. Does it take a little math and confidence? Yes. But is it completely possible? Yes. Patterns are not rules. Patterns are guides, not prisons. And this is one of those lies that's rarely said out loud. It's more of an assumption by designers and by crafters alike that you're supposed to follow a pattern exactly as written and not question it. But the truth is, every experienced crocheter or knitter modifies patterns whether they realize it or not. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm an absolute sucker for a good modification. I love tweaking patterns to make them work better for my body, my wardrobe, and my lifestyle. And honestly, I respect designers when they appreciate those modifications, because that tells me they understand something really important. I keep the bones of their design while making it my own. The structure, the idea, the intention is all still there. I just personalized it. And at the end of the day, the garment is going in my closet, so yes, I should like it. If you ever felt nervous about modifying a crochet or knitting pattern, if you ever thought you weren't advanced enough to change things, or if you've ever fallen victim to the idea that patterns are untouchable, congratulations, you're officially taking your power back and you're exactly where you need to be. Those are the biggest lies I wanted to cover today, but I know this conversation doesn't end here. If there's a pattern lie you've experienced and I didn't mention it, drop it in the comments below. I genuinely love the conversations that happen in the comments section on videos like this, and chances are someone else is dealing with the same frustration you are. And if this video opened your eyes or made you think, okay, maybe I can change patterns, then you need to watch this video next. I have a full video called How to Elevate Any Crochet or Knitting Pattern with these 5 simple modifications. It breaks down exactly how to start modifying patterns in a way that's approachable, practical, and not overwhelming. Go watch that next so you can keep building confidence and actually start loving your finished projects. If this video helped you or entertained you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a fellow crocheter or knitter who needs to hear this. Until next time, happy crocheting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!